Welcome back, Rosebuds. Today we have a total of 4 sinister sleep paralysis stories. I always find sleep paralysis stories interesting because quite often the lines between reality and the paranormal can be extremely blurred. It's normal for individuals to strongly feel there's more to their experiences than mere brain chemicals and dreaming causing their terrifying experiences. And in some cases, I think I agree. If you're new here, welcome. Our content is a lot like that old 90s show, Beyond Belief Fact or Fiction. So today we have some alleged true stories and one fictional story written by me. Have fun guessing which are the true ones and which one is made up. Make sure to listen all the way to the end, where I'll reveal the imposter story. With that, let's dive into our 4 sinister sleep paralysis tales to tell in the dark. Story number 1, Specter in the Shadows. As a child, I suffered from sleep paralysis every night for years. The horrors that visited me were not mere figments of my imagination. Shadowy figures loomed over me, but the most terrifying of them all was the entity that resembled a hag. Her presence commanded authority, though she never spoke. Her cold, lifeless gaze would lock onto me as it watched the other shadow figures torment me. And if it was alone, it would run up and down the hallway outside my door, like a predator stalking its prey. But one night, something changed. I awoke to find an unimaginable terror staring back at me, mere inches from my face. Its head was a void of blackness with scraggly fur covering its silhouette. Its eyes were wide and white, lacking any trace of eyelids. A sadistic grin with teeth and eyes that seemed to glow in the dark stretched across its face. I bolted out of bed and woke my parents. I thought it was over, but it happened again in a different part of the house. This time, the image was clear. A sickly, homeless-looking man with gray, scraggly hair. He stared at me with a cold, lifeless gaze as if daring me to make a move. My screams filled the air as I scrambled away. I thought I was alone with these bad dreams, but my brother saw how distressed I was, and he confessed that he'd seen it too. He'd never said anything before, but now I knew the truth. The horrors I faced every night were not simple sleep paralysis. They were something more sinister, something that lurked in the shadows and fed on my fear. I'm convinced they were determined to break me, to drive me insane, and I knew that I wasn't alone. Others had seen them too, felt their cold breath on their skin. As the years went by, the horrors visited me less and less, but their memory lingered, haunting me like a specter. And even now as an adult, sometimes I can feel their presence lurking in the shadows, like they're waiting for me to let my guard down. The memory of that night, of those twisted, malevolent faces, will stay with me forever. Story number 2, Not My Mom. Not sure if this was a sleep paralysis experience or it really happened. Here goes. I once stayed at a hotel in Italy all by myself. During my first night there, something strange happened as I was trying to fall asleep in my room. While lying in bed, someone knocked on my door. I heard my mom's voice saying, "CR, open the door." I looked up at the door in fear and thought, no way, that can't be my mom, since she wasn't in Italy at all. I was shocked, but I tried to go back to sleep without responding or getting up. The knocking started again, and I looked up at the door once more. "CR, open the door," my mom's voice said again, but this time with a very sad tone. It was frightening and my heart was racing. I decided to stand up and walk slowly to the door. There was a peephole on the door, and I looked through it. Across the hallway, I saw a black figure with a black hat, just standing still in the shadows and watching me. I couldn't recognize any facial features. I stepped slowly backwards and then went back to bed. I seem to remember many more strange things happened before I finally fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning and walked to the door, I realized that there was no peephole in it at all, and I couldn't really remember the other strange things. I was freaked out because I was 100% sure that I was awake when all those things happened the night before. Story number 3, always floating. I have so many strange stories, but the most prolific and horrifying ones are those I experienced during sleep paralysis. I know what you're thinking, it's not a demonic encounter, but please read on and you'll understand. When I first experienced sleep paralysis, I was around 14. In the actual dream, I woke up and found myself floating above my bed, looking down at myself asleep in the bed. I felt terrified, and I could definitely sense something bad or evil in the room with me. I felt like I needed to get back to my body quickly, but I couldn't. I felt like something was holding me there. After struggling for some time, I was flung across my room and landed on my bedroom floor. Again, all I wanted to do was get back to my body, but I couldn't. The feeling of being restrained or held back was even stronger. I don't remember the dream ending, but I was back in my body and awoke terrified and unable to sleep until early in the morning. There were other occurrences around my house that happened prior to this dream and also thereafter. For a long time, I thought I could hear deep breathing coming from the air vents on the roof above my bed. It scared me, but I just wanted to ignore it. I was scared to pay any attention to any of this stuff and brushed it off as my dad's snoring echoing through it. After the sleep paralysis episode, I was in the shower one day and I heard what sounded like a deep, raspy man's voice softly saying,
"I have a surprise for you when you get out."
At the time, I assumed it was my dad and that he had something like a Twilight poster for me. I thought his voice sounded softer and raspier because I was in the shower. When I got out of the shower, the manhole to the attic, which was positioned right outside of the bathroom door, was open, exposing the pitch black insides of the roof. I screamed so loud. I further investigated, questioning everyone in the house to see if they had opened it, but nobody had. I've continued to have sleep paralysis episodes like this occasionally through life. I'm 26 now, and this has happened maybe 5 or 6 times max since that first time. It varies now, like I won't always be floating. Sometimes I'm getting dragged out of my sleeping body in bed and unable to hold on to my body. It happens in different ways, but it's always the same thing. I'm conscious and being removed or forced out of my unconscious physical body. I've noticed this only happens when I'm really struggling and in a very weak emotional, psychological state. There have been smaller things that occurred throughout my childhood growing up, but they weren't always unpleasant, just more supernatural, ghostly experiences. I think I'm possibly more susceptible to these things, but to be honest, these sleep paralysis episodes scare the life out of me, and I want nothing to do with them. They leave me on edge for days, and I struggle to sleep. Story number 4, coping. When I was a kid, I used to have these night terrors that would keep me up at night. They started when I was in the 2nd grade and went on until 6th grade. The first one was the most traumatizing. I remember waking up to an ET-like figure standing at the foot of my bed, its 3-figured hands stretching out to grab me. I couldn't move or scream. I was paralyzed with fear. The figure spoke to me in a voice that sounded like a mix between a robotic voice and my own mother's voice, saying,
"It's time, Kelly. It's time."
I felt like I was being choked out and could only half wake myself up, feeling like I was being held down by some invisible force. The night terrors continued, each one different from the last. One night I dreamt that I was trapped in a maze with walls made of bones. I could hear something breathing heavily behind me, but whenever I turned around, there was nothing there. Another time, I was running through a dark forest, being chased by a monster with glowing red eyes. Its breath was hot on my neck, and I could hear its claws scraping against the trees. It wasn't until I was in the 4th grade that I learned how to wake myself up from these night terrors. I would try to remind myself that it was all just a dream, and that I could wake up if I wanted to. It didn't always work, but it gave me some sense of control over my own mind. As I got older, the night terrors became less frequent. I only had them a few times a year, but they were still just as terrifying. One night, I dreamt that I was in a hospital room with doctors and nurses surrounding me. They were telling me that I was dying and there was nothing they could do to save me. I felt myself slipping away and I couldn't wake myself up. It wasn't until my mom came into the room to check on me that I was able to snap out of it. I never told anyone about my night terrors. Not my parents, not even my closest friends. I was afraid they would think I was crazy or that they would make fun of me. But one day, in my high school psychology class, we were talking about sleep disorders, and night terrors came up. I mustered up the courage to share my experience, and to my surprise, a few other classmates had gone through similar experiences. One girl shared that she used to have night terrors where she was being chased by giant spiders. Another boy talked about a recurring dream where he was always falling from a great height. It was comforting to know that I wasn't alone in my experience and that it wasn't just my wild imagination playing tricks on me. I'm an adult now, and I still have the occasional night terror, but they don't bother me as much. I know that they're just dreams, and I have the power to wake myself up if I need to. I've also learned that it's important to talk about the experiences, even the scary ones. It helps me feel less alone and realize that I'm not the only one going through these kinds of things. Looking back on my childhood, I realized that my night terrors were a manifestation of anxieties and fears that were going on in my everyday life. I think they were a way for my brain to process and cope with those stressors in my life. As I've grown older, I found healthier ways to cope with my anxiety, but I'll never forget those night terrors and the way they made me feel like I was trapped in my own mind. Well, Rosebuds, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Before I do the reveal for our creative fictional story, don't forget to give us a quick thumbs up and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the stories, why not share them with a friend? It really helps us out. Now, I've personally never had sleep paralysis, so I can't even imagine how terrifying it must be. I do believe in some cases that it can cross over into the unknown realm of the paranormal, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Leave us a comment and tell us what you think. All right, the moment you've all waited for. On to our imposter story reveal, which is story number 1, Specter in the Shadows, about the ghostly apparitions along with a hag-like entity haunting the person when they were a child. I don't really have inspiration to share on this one since I just shared that I don't have sleep paralysis, but my writer mind was trying to conceptualize what it would feel like if I did. So just pure fiction today, Rosebuds. That's a wrap. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care and stay creepy.